listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome in once again to the Hazard Ground Podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining us. A couple of notes before we get to this week's guest. Want to remind you guys about our promotion, our partnership with Amazon. Go to our website, hazardground.com. A lot of great stuff on the website. Former guests, pictures, bios, things of that information. But right in the middle of our homepage on hazardground.com is a box that says Amazon.com on it. I want you to click on that box. I want you to do all your normal Amazon shopping. Whatever you spend, we'll get a percentage of. We take that percentage and donate it right back to some of the charities you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground Podcast. So just by doing your Amazon shopping through hazardground.com, you'll be helping out vets all over the country. Great stuff for you. Reminder, follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, Hazard Ground Podcast. Keep up with everything we have going on the show, including the guests featured each week. Speaking of guests, we'd love to hear from you guys. Send us an email at producer@hazardground.com, producer@hazardground.com. If you know anybody who's got a great story to tell, a story you'd like to hear featured here on the Hazard Ground, send us an email. Again, producer@hazardground.com, and we'll try to get him featured here on the show as a guest. There's nothing better that we like than telling the stories of America's heroes and America's servicemen and women. So again, love to hear from you guys. Any comments you have, producer@hazardground.com. Speaking of comments, go to iTunes, leave us a rating and a review. Doesn't have to be a long review. Just tell us what you like about the show or what you don't like. Leave us a rating as well. That helps grow the show, the popularity of the show, and continues to get us bigger and better sponsors and bigger and better guests. So do your part, guys. Help us out. We know you love the show, and we certainly appreciate you being part of the Hazard Ground family. Now on to this week's episode. Joining us this week, a very special guest who I actually had the honor of serving under in Iraq as he did one of 3 tours there. He originally started his career in the 75th Ranger Regiment, had more than 200 jumps with paratroopers and Rangers. He went on to do 3 tours in Iraq. As well, he went on to achieve the rank of Lieutenant General, where he had several high-level commands in the U.S. Army, and he is retired Lieutenant General Mike Ferriter joining us on the Hazard Ground. Sir, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you this morning, and hello to everybody.
Very extensive resume. I know I couldn't get it all in, but one thing I did leave out, and I want to get into this because I find this is really important and transformative. For those who don't know, General Ferriter is responsible for bringing combatives to the Army. And I have to personally say thank you for that, because it's one of those skills that I think we're a better Army for. We're better trained. We're better soldiers. We're tougher. And without that, I think, this force is definitively missing a key component of it. And as the war on terror continues, those skills are more and more important in everything that we do. So we'll get into the combatives part of thing and how your role in that developed. But let's start all the way back to the beginning, sir. And I know 35 plus years ago, but how did you get into the Army and why?
Well, I grew up in an Army family, and we traveled around. I moved about 18 times in my first 18 years. My dad started as a private in World War II. He went to officer candidate school, and then he retired out in California with my mom and brothers and sisters. He retired as a colonel, and so we were in Carmel and Monterey, California, and my dad said, why don't you take a look at going to this school called the Citadel in Charleston? And he had served underneath the then serving president. And I said, well, I really want to play baseball down in Santa Barbara with my buddies. And he said, well, why don't you just take a look at the Citadel? You have a scholarship there. And I said, well, I might go to Sacramento State and play basketball with my buddies there. And he said, why don't you take a look at the Citadel? And I said, well, okay, I'll give it a try. And I figured I would be in the Army. I watching the Army of Europe back during Vietnam, and watching the Army as I grew up, I just could see men and women of character who really were prideful and felt great about their service, and they felt great about the people they were with. So I thought, well, I'll give that a try. It can't be too bad. And so I went to school in Charleston at the Citadel on an Army ROTC scholarship, and was commissioned. I asked for infantry and received infantry. In 1979, I was commissioned, and so that's pretty much. And I thought, and I even had friends 20 years later saying, you have to serve 20 years in the Army to pay back 4 years of college. And I said, no, at this point, I'm doing it because I love it. And but that's pretty much how I got into it.
Interesting, because, at the time you were doing this, there's kind of like this post-Vietnam lamaze about the military and America in general, and your dad had went to World War II, and after seeing what happened in Vietnam, there was never any talk of, don't go in the military, look what happens and everything. I mean, it was always just he wanted you to do this?
Well, I've got a couple brothers and sisters, and we were all pretty much allowed to pursue what our heart was all about. So my oldest sister's still a hippie in New Mexico, and my older brother's a producer and director on Broadway. My next oldest sister, almost an Irish twin, 13 months older, is a wonderful person and a great lawyer in Sacramento. And my younger brother's a Hollywood agent. And so my mom said, don't clap when you have little ones because they'll go into the arts, make them do work and they'll go into the military. So I'm the one that followed in the family, my father's footsteps.
Interesting. Okay. So as you start the beginning of your career, what's standing out to you when you look back on it? Because I think at that time, correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't know you were going to do 20 years. You were kind of just doing what you were supposed to do at that point in time and fill the commitment. Or did you feel like you were going to do 20 years at that point in time?
The way I would tell everyone they should live their life in the way that I thought I lived mine is, I was going to serve, and I would stay in the military until it was either no longer rewarding, where I couldn't make a difference for people, or where I was asked to compromise my integrity. I said, I'll walk out, whether I'm a lieutenant or lieutenant general. It doesn't matter to me. What's important is that, we end up with our faith and our family and our friends and our integrity all intact, whether we serve 3 years or 35 years. And so, I thought I'd probably go 4 years and then go to law school. That's what I thought. And I never took door number 3. I stayed right there.
So as you're developing as a young lieutenant, and again, you chose the infantry, I mean, was it just because of the physical nature of it? Did you know what you were getting into at the time?
Well, I think we know what probably we're getting into. And I just wanted to be, be with the main thing, The main thing is the combat arms, and in particular, 100 yards of any fight is an infantryman's. And so I wanted to be with the people who thought that that's where they could make a difference, either in peace or in war. And then you start to learn and develop and grow, and you really learn more about what everything is, and as you say.
So you end up in the 75th Ranger Regiment, one of the most elite, units in all of the Army. Was that by happenstance, or did you want to go there?
Yeah, I think I was raised to, go seek the next challenge, and I certainly believe that even today. And so I served in the mechanized infantry at Fort Riley, and then I went up to parachute infantry in Fairbanks, Alaska. And I said, so what's the next step? And they said, well, there's this outfit called the Ranger Battalions. There's one at Fort Lewis, and there's one at Fort Benning, and there's one in Augusta, or in Savannah, Georgia. And so, kind of naively, I just called down there and said, hey, how do you get in? And they said, oh, that'll never happen. You got to know 3 special people, and you have to have a Ranger tattoo at birth and all that kind of stuff. And so I think one of the lessons in life also is be really good at rejecting rejection. So I said, okay, well, I'll call you back. And so I, put in the paper packet and got a recommendation or 2. And then I called them, and they said, hey, I'm glad you called back, because some guy we thought we had dropped out, and we have a slot. If you can fly down from Alaska to Fort Lewis, we'll do interviews next week. And so the lesson there is you got to move on opportunity, and you got to take risk. And so I did, and that started me off on the next 11, 12, 13 years of my Army tour back and forth between the 82nd Airborne Division and the Ranger Regiment.
I've said this for years, sir, and obviously you know this, but it's weird how the Army always has a way of putting you where you're supposed to be. if you just sort of hang around long enough, it's whether it's serendipity or, just good fortune or whatever, it's just one of those things where somehow the Army always finds a place that you fit in well.
Absolutely. And it may not be the place when, we have, my wife Margie and I have been married, some 40 years now. And everywhere we went, we thought, we're not everywhere, but many places that we went was like, oh, I don't know about this. And then you find out this was awesome. And the people there were awesome too.
All right, so I know it's hard to kind of go quickly through 35 years without getting stuck in too much of the minutia, but obviously you're progressing in rank and going along. I do want to fast forward a little bit to Somalia because it's a story we've recounted a lot here on the podcast. Where are you prior to things in Somalia kicking off? What's your assignment, and how eventually do you end up there?
I was the Battalion S3 of 3rd Ranger Battalion. Most people don't talk about it, but so Somalia was 3 October 1993. 29 October 1992, we had a horrible helicopter crash on a special operation mission that killed 2 of the Ranger battalions. I was a major. I was the ops officer. And so the backdrop of Somalia is that John Keneally, great leader that he was killed. And then Danny McKnight was rushed into the Ranger battalion to backfill him. And so we trained through that winter, got ready, went on block leave in July, and came back for another big special operation mission at Fort Bliss, Texas. And we got word that there was killing in the streets of this place called Mogadishu, and the first part of our special operations task force was going to go forward. And so Colonel McKnight and one Ranger company, Bravo company, went forward with other special operators from Task Force Ranger. I stayed behind and continued the training, ready to bring Alpha Company forward. And that was August 15th. And then a couple weeks later, on a Sunday morning, we got word there was big fighting in the streets. And so we were alerted, and I carried Alpha Company forward. And we arrived time-wise as things had just completed on the big fight that you see in the movie Black Hawk Down. So I'm also ready and proud to tell everyone 2 things. One is I arrived after the big fighting, but number 2, we trained, and any other unit in the Army might have been killed to the man on that day, October 3rd, had it not been Rangers in that fight. And so proud of what we did to get them ready, and then proud to come back about 2 years later and be their commander. But that's how I ended up there. We stayed for another month and a half or so, and then we were withdrawn. And it's a notable beginning of this war on terror back in '93.
Interesting to know. So Matt Eversman actually is a friend of mine, and he was the first ever guest here on the podcast. So he tells the story just, beautifully, obviously, with all of its good and bad that goes with it. Let me ask you, just from a standpoint, because, somebody in your position, when you get to your career, you're always charged with looking back and evaluating what went right and what went wrong. Even though you weren't there for the fighting, I'm sure you sat in on some of those discussions and everything else. What are your takeaways from the whole thing?
First is train the way you fight, right? So these ad hoc thrown together organizations usually are going to leave some gaps. And if you're going to ad hoc an organization and take pieces, parts, then you better account for that by way of understanding the risk. So what I'm saying is we always train as a Ranger Battalion with a Ranger Battalion staff, and then we sent the colonel forward with no help. And so then that can impact when and how they launch on a mission, how their supervision went during the time, the couple days before, and why they had some gear and they didn't have other gear, and what intel was provided to them, since the Ranger intel was left behind, and it was more of a conglomeration of intel from multiple sources. So that's the big thing. Train the way you fight, and train for the fight that you're going to be in. The positive takeaways are, rugged, tough training pays off. Yeah. Rangers and soldiers shooting their weapons confidently in peacetime so that they can shoot confidently when in combat, it really pays off. teaching self-aid, buddy aid, first aid really pays off. And those training things we did saved many lives. There were of about 80 Rangers in the streets, probably 69 were wounded, and we lost 6. And so a lot of the good hard training, and then this never quit attitude that great soldiers have, and our whole Army, after some 18 years of time in combat zones, is so good today for that. And those that talk about the Army and its equipment's worn out, well, that's true, but our people are well trained, and they're super smart, and they're super get after it kind of men and women. So those things are really what carried into the great 90s and right into 9/11. And then as Rangers populate the Army, and as their techniques populated the Army and the Marines, then we had better fighting men and women.
Major General Garrison, who was in charge of the whole entire thing, for those who don't know, he was the kind of OIC on the ground, if you will, in charge of everything of Task Force Ranger. After it was over, he took blame for the entire thing. Was he right to do that, or was he just doing what he was supposed to do as far as a guy in charge? And again, I'm asking your opinion. I'm not asking for doctrine. I'm just kind of curious to get your thoughts and feelings on it.
Oh, he's a great man.
Did he deserve to take all the blame for it?
Well, no, not at all. But what's the blame? The blame is they got in a huge fight, and the blame is we went into a country to get after some guy, and the blame is reinforcements came in, and the fight got even bigger. And God bless each of the Rangers and the other special operators and their families. But Gordon and Shugart went down the rope because they were courageous and valorous men. They received the Medal of Honor for that. The way I look at it is, when you ask soldiers to go somewhere on behalf of this country, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard, make sure you want something done, because these patriots are going to go do it, and they believe that our leaders put them there for the right reason. And he's just a noble person to say, my goal was to come here, accomplish the mission, and bring everyone back alive and unhurt, and it's my fault for anyone that got hurt. And that's what a noble leader does. I think the bigger picture is, we put together the most amazing team, and they fought essentially 6 battles, and the last one was a bloody one in particular. And that's the business that we're in.
Well said, sir. Well said. Okay. You were a major at the time, and this is 92, so it's 9 years later before 9/11 happens. Kind of fill in the gap in that portion of your career.
Yeah, really interesting. So after that, we got ready for Haiti, and we were all rigged up to parachute into Haiti and take care of business in that part of the world. And then a couple of people went down there and talked Aristide out of the fight. And so then we just really moved in sort of an occupation force to help stabilize Haiti at that moment. It was about 94, and then I went to the 82nd Airborne Division and was a parachute battalion commander of the 504th, 2nd Battalion, 504th White Devils, and just a great unit, great people, great leaders who today we're all still in contact. And then the way it works is if you have a successful company command and then later successful battalion command, then you go before board to be selected to be a Ranger Battalion commander or 2nd command. So I was selected for 3rd Ranger Battalion, and then in another 2 great years of time with the Rangers there, and then selected to go to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in Boston as a National Defense Fellow for a year. And I really wanted to get my family up into New England where the kids could play soccer up there, fights the Southeast soccer, and then selected for the training command, and that was really hurtful, almost did they know who they're dealing with? I should be Mr. Superman. Mm-hmm. And as you said, the Army figures it out. And just prior to leaving the Ranger Battalion, I met Hoist Gracie and Horian Gracie, and we brought them into 3rd Ranger Battalion to teach a thing that we coined the term combatives. And so when I got, which was hand-to-hand fighting for your listeners there. And so at that point, no one in the Army hardly could fight with their hands other than, local brawlers. And so we learned what is known as Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and ground fighting. And then when I returned as a colonel to this training command, the infantry leaders brigade, I would say, the 11th Infantry Regiment, which had airborne school, the basic course, captain's career course, officer candidate school, and really oversight of the NCO Academy. I was asked to go up and see General Abrams, who was straight out commander, and he felt that our lieutenants were getting soft, and that a lot of Bosnia, Kosovo time, a lot of, what we now call FOB time, forward operating base, sleeping on cots. He said, I want you to rewrite the basic course for officers, and I want you to scuff them up. And I told him, all right, sir, I'm good at scuffing things up, so I'll be glad to do that. So I saw the opportunity to bring combatives to the Army through that doorway.
Did you agree with his assessment? Sorry to interrupt. So did you agree with his assessment? I mean, obviously you've been at this for 15, 20 years at this point. Did you agree that we were getting softer?
It's a kind of two-part answer. One is, we have leaders in charge of people. And so if someone's not meeting a standard, then the leader needs to look in the mirror, and so they're responsible for passing on the traditions, maintaining the standards. That said, sometimes you get into this kind of, this kind of routine where it's just harder to do PT. It's just harder to do the field craft and sleep in the woods in the rain. It's, the conditions of the work where you've been assigned make it a little more difficult. That said, I think it's weak excuse for a leader to say, I can't train my people. So anyways, in life, it's what you do about it. So now I'm in a place where maybe I can do something about it.
Sure.
And then you have to get good at fighting through the bureaucracy or rejecting rejection. So first they said, well, you can't train combatives because it's not in our hand-to-hand fighting manual, which was written in the 1940s. And so me, Matt Larson, and Troy Thomas rewrote the hand-to-hand fighting manual. And they said, well, you can't do training because it's not in the program, the POI, the program of instruction for the courses. So we rewrote the courses. And then they said, well, you can't do combatives because you don't have certified instructors. So we created an instructor certification program. And then they said, you can't do it because you don't have a facility. And so I traded a guy about a bunch of MREs that were in the basement of OCS. He's a deer hunter for the book warehouse at Fort Benning. And then we created the academy, the first academy. And so those are all thrown away MREs. So there's no misuse of government property there.
Right.
And anyways, so we repurposed this building. We went and bought maps and put them on the ground and created the first, what they call Thunderdome. And so then we started training OCS and the basic course and the NCO courses. And then those were the apostles that went out to the Army to say, I am certified to train my platoon. And that's how this, never quit attitude of keep pushing the wave, keep pushing. And so Matt Larson is often called and should be called the father of Army combatives. If he's the father, then I'm the godfather. And so whenever people try to squash it or say there's a problem with it, then even now as a retired general, I'll roll back in and help them understand why we have to keep doing it. Because at that moment of truth, we need that soldier to be looking at the enemy instead of looking back for sergeant to help him.
Well said again, sir. How long does this whole process take years-wise? Because the bureaucracy of the military, as you know, it can be lengthy.
Yeah, well, that command was 2 years. And then a few years later, then I'm a general officer. So now at the 82nd, I'm asking brigade and battalion commanders, why aren't they once a week doing this. And so then this great unit starts doing it more and more. It's also interesting that the younger officers and the younger, the specialist sergeant and staff sergeant, they really love it.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then the sergeant majors and the colonels are afraid to get choked out or tapped out by some, young troop. And so in time, those staff sergeants grew up to be platoon sergeants and first sergeants and now command sergeant majors. And so, how do we get it cemented? It's really, we train the base and let them grow into it. And then we shame all the older folks that are afraid to get on the mats. Generally they'll run PT. They'll certainly shoot a sniper rifle with a soldier, but will they get on the mats and roll around with them? For some reason, there's just a little bit of ego in there. And what you really figure out about hand-to-hand fighting is it makes you more aware of yourself, more aware of things that are going on, in an attitude towards this may be tough, but I've seen tough before. I can get through this. And now we have people who can confidently, move through so many situations, to include life in the barracks, life after barracks. It's a huge, sexual harassment and sexual assault, minimizer for our guys and girls. It's just, and it's a super workout. I still train. I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now, and I'm a professor at an academy in Tacoma and work out here in Columbus, Ohio, and teach, even now. So it's a lifelong thing.
Sir, again, you and I talked before we started recording. For those who don't know, I served under General Ferriter in my second deployment to Iraq. And I remember distinctly while you were in the green zone that there's video of you with somebody doing jiu-jitsu on a mat somewhere. I had no idea where it was, but I saw a video of you and going through all this stuff. And I'm like, damn, that's a 3-star general right there, just rolling around on the mat. And now it all makes sense because you were at the top. I didn't know that until, I started reading up on your background, but now it all makes sense that you were at the tip of the spear, so to speak, for all that. So again, listen, just 2 cents from me. I think it's incredible. We are a better force for it. And thank you for having the foresight and the determination to make sure that it's part of what we're training soldiers to do. It's incredibly important. And as I said, it makes us a better force. So to that end, thank you again, and we'll move on. But where are you on 9/11? What are you doing, and what happens on that day?
Yeah, well, I had just reported into Norfolk, Virginia, to what was called Joint Forces Command, working for Army General Buck Hernan. And these joint commands have Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. And so I arrived, right at the end of August.
What rank are you at this time, sir?
I'm a colonel.
Okay.
I've completed brigade command, and I think I signed in and actually started on it's like 6 September, and a couple days later we're attacked. We're locked into the operations center for 90 days, and we're creating things like Northern Command and Homeland Security right there because there was none, and we're figuring out, and we're about to go to war. And I was there for 3 years. And so that means, by the time we launched in Afghanistan and by the time we launched into Iraq, this colonel's thinking, oh my God, I'm going to miss this war. Holy crap. I got to get my boots in the dirt and be a part of this. And,
now, why did you think you were going to miss it? Because it was going to happen so fast?
Yeah, well, in our lifetime, Grenada was about 4 days.
Right,
Panama
yeah.
was about 21, and Desert Storm was 100 hours. And so, they're thinking, I don't know what this one's going to be, but I'd sure like to get there. And then it turns out that I had more time to
little did we know
to use than I ever thought. That. So I was fortunate to be assigned as a 1-star in the 82nd Airborne Division, and then to go forward with 18th Airborne Corps on a first yet short, about 4-month time in, I think, 2005, in the summer of 5. Yeah.
Your first time you hit the ground in Iraq, do you have any preconceived notions about what you're going to see? I mean, again, you saw Somalia, you saw kind of, the depravity of war and certain things, or at least read the reports on it, saw pictures, things of that nature. But do you know what you're walking into when you hit the ground in Iraq?
What a great question. And here's why. All of our training and education and life experiences bring us to a certain level. And so when I walked in there, I thought, I'm behind. I'm a general officer, but these guys have been some of these guys are on their 11th or 12th month. And what you find out is, and therefore, I'll be lacking. I may not be able to contribute the way I think I should. And then you find out that, no, actually, they're great young officers, and they still need to be developed. The biggest thing that I saw time and again is that leaders arrive in combat, and they still need to be developed, and they still need to develop their teams. They still need to personally grow. They still need to make sure everyone's taken care of. They still need to be thoughtful in the way that they fight their fights. And so I found that, actually, I'm much more experienced than all these brigade commanders, and I can be a big help to them as they go through and control their battle space.
Do you get a sense of what the fighting is like, and whether we are, again, you talk about combatives making us better prepared. Are we prepared for the fight that we're in?
Well, initially, the gear that we went to war with and the gear today are vastly different.
Yes.
It speaks volumes to how leaders like General Cody and the innovation and the stand-up of organizations to like JIATO, the Joint IED Directorate, these teams of scientists and experts to figure out how to defeat how the enemy was fighting. So we went with thin-skinned Humvees across the berm because that's what we did in 91. And so now here we are in 2003 in April. And then guys are getting slat armor and just welding it or tying it to the,
Yep.
And so by the time I got there, we collected up all the up armor Humvees in the world and sent them. But then shortly thereafter, industry and America's might was turning out better vehicles, and then we had to respond with V-hold, vehicles and MRAPs, mine-resistant vehicles, because everyone adapts. The enemy adapts, we adapt. And so I think the other way to look at it is, especially in Iraq, every commander who came in, he probably fought a different war than the previous commander. Mm-hmm. So it was across the berm. It was moment of truth year before we lost control to the insurgents, and then the insurgents, proliferated the towns and villages. So then we began a counterinsurgency, and then we got out into the villages and all that with the surge. So each time that took, but you think about most of the Army went into Iraq on the first tour. Most of it probably had iron sights on their weapons. Yep. And then in no time we had, lasers, optics, and night vision for everybody. And that just speaks to a positive to how the industrial Army took care of the troops.
I'm curious, sir, and give me a moment here to kind of put this whole thought together, because I want to get your viewpoint. Because as a general officer, you typically operate at the 30,000 foot view. You're not the Joe on the ground where the rubber meets the road. That's just the nature of the way our organization is structured. You can't help that. Sure, you can go down there time to time, but you don't spend every day there. It's not practical, nor is it necessary. But I remember, as you talked about, the constant back and forth that we went through from, tactics, techniques, and procedures. And I remember, it was, when the IEDs, when I got there in 2005 and they started to ramp up, people were welding iron on the bottom of the Humvees. Well, then they became too slow. And then they had guys up in the turret worried about shrapnel, and they had them ducking down. And then they put an arm out in front of the Humvee to try to set the tripwire off ahead of time. And back and forth and round and round we go. The enemy adjusted, we adjusted. Back and forth, round and round we go. And so, I can recall things that had happened to me and firefights and everything that we get into. And it's not that I ever felt like I was unprepared, but I always began to wonder, as you learn more going through your deployment, you get more experiences and things happen, you're sitting here, you're trying to develop your own way to keep yourself alive, essentially. And regardless of what manuals say and what, lessons learned are, the lay of the land where you are on a daily basis, and you are better equipped at that point to keep yourself alive than anybody in your position at 30,000 feet can tell you. That said, how do you go about bridging that gap because you're charged with making sure the people on the ground have what they need and they are protected and they can fight the fight that they're in and they can win the fight that they're in, and we have a decided advantage. But bridging that gap takes time, and sometimes you don't have that time in combat.
Yeah, really great question, because everyone wants on the team. Everyone wants to play shortstop, right? But you need right fielders and left fielders and catchers and stuff.
Sure.
And so in Iraq, which is a relatively contained battle space, it's easy for everyone to see something at the same time, and someone at 2 or 3 or 4 levels up trying to be involved in helping the platoon leader fight that fight. Now, in some cases, that's great. They scrambled jets, they scrambled attack helos, but at that point, it's got to be handed over to the commander on the ground to fight. And so at that 30,000-foot level, the best in the world at it was General Lloyd Austin, in keeping his staff, of which I was a 1-star and a 2-star underneath him, and then a 3-star underneath him in my final tour in Iraq. And in keeping us both time-wise, what are we going to need in August? Let's get it now. If we know that if we put our men and women at the right place, in the right with the right gear and the right battle ratio, we know we're going to win that. So now what's going to roll out of that? So he got ahead of the curve, and then we became helpful. So he could help General Champeau, or he could help General Castellan, or he could help General Bolger, with the stuff that they needed when they needed it, rather than get the call and then have a 60-day lag. So each one, so in other words, everyone wants to go walk the battlefield every single day, but they have to do their part first. On the other hand, I drove almost every street in Iraq with my guys and with battalion, brigade commanders, company commanders, many of whom went through those basic courses when I was the brigade commander. Many of those who were the captains that I sent out to the divisions, when I was the brigade commander. So it was a personal relationship between me and those guys, and I was able to watch, admire, and learn from them as walking patrols or riding out to see them and understanding the battle space, and then go back and do our job. So we had a really good team with 18th Airborne Corps, and then later the Multinational Force.
Were you ever impressed or shocked, or I'm not sure what the adjective is, but from your first deployment to your second, how much things had changed? Did any of that, take you back or surprise you? Find the right word for me, sir, but whatever it is, your reaction to how much things had changed, I suppose.
Well, yeah, the second one was a 15-month tour from 2008 to mid-2009. When we arrived, we thought we would defeat Al-Qaeda in the north, sustain the victories of the surge in central Iraq, and create civil capacity and agriculture, rule of law in the south. In the first month, the Iranian-backed militias in the south attacked, and so we were in a big fight down there. And so what that taught me is the plan's a good one, and it'll give you the fundamentals, but then you're going to have to respond, and then you're going to have to take leaders who've all done their train-ups to get to where they think they're going, and tell them you're moving in 24 hours south to fight in the streets of Basra, kind of thing. So to me, the things that will always pay off is leaders who are agile and innovative and creative and trust each other and are fit and are tough. And then the other things can either impede, you don't have everything you need, or they can enhance, you have some really high speed stuff. So we would see the gear change, but not the nature of war. It was still about 18 to 25-year-olds who believe in each other that are going to fight for those guys in that squad.
Your final deployment in Iraq 2011, as I mentioned earlier, I was there for it as well. And this is just one at that time, one staff major's opinion. It was 5 years between my deployments. I was there 05 to 06, and the second one was 2011. So I had seen just a dramatic change. And not only just the lay of the land in the country, but just the operational environment was completely different. And I always tell people, that second deployment, I kind of hated. And I hated it because we went there to leave. And that was the general, I'm 05 to 06, I'm running around through the streets of Baghdad, my hair on fire for 15 months and, trying to stay alive, but loving life in a sense. You're at the pinnacle of your career. I always look back on that deployment as the best part of my 19 plus years as I continue on. But that second deployment, it was just, we went there to leave. And I almost began to sit there and wonder, as we were leaving, what did we really accomplish? Now, I know diplomatically, and when you talk about, the kind of higher level, of things that we try to achieve and the goals that we try to achieve may be different. But when you look at the ground level, you almost saw a lot of stuff that had gone backwards. A little disheartening, but understanding that, for as long as we were at it, it was probably bound to happen. But when you look at the course of your 3 deployments there, and you just look at what we set out to accomplish in the objective, how do you grade what happened?
Yeah, I have a friend named Chuck Otterstedt who I played golf with back in the day. Chuck's around Fort Bragg, lives there, and great guy, really great friend. And I'd hit a golf ball, and I'd say, "Hey, Chuck, you think that ball just went in the water?" And he'd say, "Hey, sir, too close to call." which meant it's in the water. But when I'm asked this question, I always say it's too close to call.
Sure.
The connecting thoughts are this: I grew up in an Army family, and we lived in Berlin. And as long as we lived in Berlin, the Soviets didn't have it. And as long as we have American presence in somewhere in the Middle East like that, then the Persians don't have it. Simple. And so strategically, there's a payoff for the 7,000+ men and women killed and 27 to 30,000 wounded badly. Really tough, really tough to look in the eyes of their loved ones and say it was absolutely worth it. It's just tough. And so I'd go back to something I sort of said is, hey, America, you're lucky you have these kind of men and women, because they will answer the call and they will not question until they have time to sit back with a delicious IPA and their reunions and talk about their best friends and talk about, what do you think? Was it worth it? And 2020 hindsight gives a lot of different views. But, we answered the call. I think that's the significant part of being a soldier or a military member, and fought with distinction. And, if you think of, we had a few mishaps, but if you think of the number of man hours, soldier hours, Marine hours on the ground, and how the level of integrity, the level of courage, and the level of character that was shown, the few number of any kind of, atrocities, if you want to use that, or war crimes, if you want to use that, or just, misbehaving. It's, that's where I place my focus and my pride is on those guys. Cause, my son Dan is on his 12th combat tour and he's in Afghanistan today. My son Patty is an Army Ranger and, he's got 10. My son-in-law Garrett has 6 or 7. My daughter even has 1. So, America answered the call, and when we say, what do you think? I think it's too close to call, right? And we'll go up to the water and look and see if the ball's in or if it held up and still got a shot at the grave.
Yeah, and something like this, or winning or losing, it's not binary, right? Like you can't call a win or a loss because, for people who walk the turf and live through the war and survive combat, that's always a win for them. Doesn't matter strategically what happened. That's a win for them. You bring all your troops home, that's a win. And from that standpoint, I could say that I won, but I'm not charged with the strategic level decisions. As a mid-grade captain, in Iraq on my first deployment, my job was to work in my battle space, bring everybody home safe, and accomplish the mission. And from that standpoint, it's a win. I did my piece of the pie, and how the other pieces fall, I really have no control over. But I'm always curious when I talk to people who look at the whole pie and are judged by the whole pie. It's obviously a different viewpoint. So I agree with your sentiment that too close to call. But some people have strong feelings one way or another, as far as the strategy behind it and whether we accomplished everything we were supposed to. Let's get towards the end of your career. Now, look, 35 years at this point in time, you are reaching almost mandatory retirement. Well, I guess when you're a general, you don't get mandatory retirement anymore, but how do you know your career is over?
Yeah, so I came back from Iraq, and actually when I was in Iraq, General Dempsey came over there, and he said he knew me from, he commanded Training and Doctrine Command as a 4-star when I commanded Fort Benning underneath him as a 2-star. So we had a great relationship, and he said, what do you think you want to do next? And I said, oh, so that's easy. I want to be the commanding general of 18th Airborne Corps. And he said, that's perfect, but you're not going to do that. And I said, oh, okay. He said, what else? I said, well, I got a lot of joint time, NATO time, a lot of time in combat. I could be the J3 of the Joint Staff. And he said, or the G3 of the Army. He said, you'd be perfect for that, but you're not going to do that. And then I said, well, I got a lot of time as a Ranger, so I could be the USASOC commanding general to the United States Army Special Ops Command, know everybody, know the business, been here in combat. I'd be perfect. He said, I didn't even think of that, but that is perfect. But nope, you're not going to do that. and he said, what do you think about commanding the U.S. Army Installation Management Command? All of the bases around the world. And I said, I could be 18th Airborne Corps. and so I said, hey, sir, I grew up in an Army family. Margie and I raised an Army family. The Army's always been good to us. And if you want me to take care of Army families, then I'm your man. And so I reported to both the Pentagon and San Antonio. I was still had it as an Army staff officer called the Assistant Chief of Staff for Installations, and I was the Commanding General of Installations, and said, okay, let's get fired up, and took over a command that was kind of beleaguered and felt beat up. And I said, you know what, we are going to love this, and we're going to know that every day we slam the car door and run to the office because we're serving soldiers and their families. And we had a pretty good run at it. $12 billion a year budget, 120,000 employees, 75 bases in 17 time zones, $12 billion budget. And in 2 years, we took $2.9 billion out of the budget. We transformed everything, and we made the workforce feel like $1 million. And I think we did a damn good job of taking care of our families and their soldiers, especially at the tail end of combat. And then to answer your question, so at about at the end of the first year, I asked the leadership, what's next? They said, well, we're looking at a few things. And then sometime around a year and a half, they said, we don't think we have anything else for you. And that's the way it works. So for all you young listeners out there, start with your faith and your friends and your integrity, because someday you're going to leave and it won't necessarily be exactly when you're ready for it. And so I thought, I can do so much more. But the Lord's really our assignment officer, and he puts you where you need to be. And so I retired in June of 2014. I started a leadership company called the Ferriter Group. And we did more than 42 seminars using jiu-jitsu as a model for life, teaching women empowerment, high school kids, sexual assault prevention, and then also using them as team builders for offsites for big companies. And then, you say you're a paratrooper and a Ranger, and everyone says, thanks for your service. You say you ran a Fortune 500 company called IMCOM. You become a consultant. And so I did a lot of consulting work for people. And mostly, Margie and I said, we'll work with men and women of character who like each other and want to work with the military and help our families or our soldiers. And we found some scoundrels, and we just turned our back on them. But we helped out a lot of companies that helped our guys and girls on base. And then one day, May 11th last year, my phone rang, and someone said, how would you like to be the president and CEO of the new National Veterans Memorial and Museum? And at the time, I was a finalist to be the new secretary of the VA, and had previously, along with Mike Lennington, interviewed to be Wounded Warrior Project. So a couple good things just about came. And then the folks here in Columbus asked me to come and visit. I did. And they asked me to come back, and they offered the position. And so 87 days later, we opened up the brand new National Veterans Museum here in Columbus, Ohio, and have a magnificent team, iconic architecture, and it tells the story, just like you and I have told today, of what it is to be a service member and how life after can be significant as well.
A lot to unpack. Let me back up a second as you kind of get to the end of your career.
Sure.
You had so much experience with guys on the ground, right? Training hard and doing all that stuff. And part of this actually is a personal question for me, because as a battalion commander now, I've had to learn this lesson. But as you move up in rank, we just talked about before, you kind of get away from the ground level. Being the fact that you had so much time with guys training side by side and doing all that stuff, and as you move up, you get away from that. How do you reconcile not being there anymore? I mean, do you just get used to it from the standpoint of this is what the Army needs me to do, and I can't spend the time that I want to down? I mean, because I miss that. Like, part of me just misses being a commander on the ground and training and spending time with Joe and working hard and getting dirty and all that stuff. I mean, that's kind of happy as a pig and you know what, as they say, because that's kind of what you signed up to do at the outset. So when you spend so much time away from that, do you miss that, or has it just kind of become routine?
Well, I think certainly I miss it, but I don't dwell on it. And then you can live the joys of it as well by seeing that these guys all made battalion command. They were all your children, so to speak, or these guys have made general officer, flag officer, and we know that they're really solid and they'll take it to the next level. And then you invest in something else. You invest yourself in some other form of helping people and doing great things. Doing triathlons. Doing jiu-jitsu, working out, twice a day if you can. And so you still get that kind of adrenaline junkie rush. And then there are plenty of opportunities for retired folks to be a part of things. Like, I have a veteran advisory committee here, and we're pulling people in for that. Or IMCOM has a gray beard, committee, and we meet once a year and help the standing commanding general see things. But I like to remind everyone as well, remember that day when they folded that flag and they gave it to you and said, thank you very much for your service? Or remember that day when you hand over the guidon or hand over the colors to the next guy? Let them run the race. So you can miss it. You can watch from afar and be proud, and then go get busy somewhere else. Is kind of the approach I take.
It's interesting you talk about feeling like you have more to do. I tell everybody as I approach 20 years, and I don't have any designs on getting out at this point unless the government tells me they don't need me anymore. But, I was remarking to a couple of guests on the podcast that I didn't really ever think that there wasn't going to be a time when I wasn't going to be able to do this, right? Like, they tell you as a lieutenant, all the lieutenant colonels like, 20 years goes by in a blink of an eye, and you're sitting there as a young, punk lieutenant going, what the hell are you talking about, 20 years? I can't imagine 20 weeks from now, let alone 20 years. And then I look back and I say to myself now, like, what the hell did 20 years ago? And I start to realize there's going to be a time where I can't do this anymore. Like, the government's going to say, thank you, we don't need you anymore. So, like, I was telling my parents, I'm like, the Army's been part of my life for over half of the time I've been alive. Like, I don't know really a world without it. And part of me wants to deploy one more time. Like, I just kind of want to get in the fight one more time, almost like an athlete who wants to make one more run at a championship, right? Like, it's like, I really just want to experience that rush one more time before I'm forced to hang it up and say goodbye. Did you ever have that feeling and that thought?
One thing happened when I was at Command General Staff College, and we had a 4-star. They run a match if they still do, but every other week, every third week, there's some general, and we all go into the giant auditorium, and some guy gives us a speech on something. So this guy steps up there and he says, you know what happened this morning before I came up here? He said, the Chief of Staff of the Army called me, or I had to call him, and he told me that I was going to retire in 4 months. And this gentleman looked at us. He said, I just found this out. I am in no way ready. And so, I sat there and looked at this guy. I was close enough to look him in the eyes, and I thought, wow, you know what? Every one of us is going to leave. And so that kind of set the tone, was a precursor to there'll be a day. So now how do I set the conditions so that I leave on my terms? And my terms were, I didn't want to be an old, pissed off, crotchety general. I didn't want to be, you see them all the time. Like,
yeah.
I should have been this, and I got screwed by that. If only we hadn't done this. Hey, get over it, And so I didn't want that. And I didn't want to be, and we had some tough calls, and especially in the last job with IMCOM, with, the bureaucracy, trying to push my people around and trying to, get in the way, and just some horrible command lines of operation during that time. And so I wasn't going to, I wasn't going to negotiate my integrity or my belief in doing what's right. And I stood up to some very senior people and to say, we'll get this, we got it, we'll be all right. And so from that 1991 moment or 1990 moment to, to the time when I said, okay, well, let's set the date for June and retire that date, about 6 months in advance. I think I was ready, at least mentally knowing that day would come. I would hoped that it wouldn't come at that point. I would have hoped to, to be retiring still, busy and making things happen in the summer of 2019 at my 40th. But that's not what was in the plan. And so, not a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror if you want to make things happen.
We talked a lot here about how much, training has changed, tactics have changed, over the course of your career. How has leadership changed? Because dynamic leadership now is so much different than what it used to be. As a younger, newer crop of soldiers, airmen, Marines, Coast Guard enter the military, leadership is challenged now more than ever with a whole bunch of different things that were never challenged with before. So and I know it's a really overarching question, sir, but, obviously over the course of 40 years, what have you seen from the military and the way leadership has changed, and how much better are we now than we used to be?
I think there's a little bit of both. I think, first of all, leaders really have to understand that the heart and the soul of the soldier that shows up in front of them, generation after generation, it's going to be pretty close to the same. But the difference is the start point. And so, so leaders that wring their hands today and say, oh, they're not as hard as we were, and they're all millennials, and they want to read their, you just got to establish standards, and then you got to lead them from the front, and you've got to hold them. All units have standards, and great units enforce them. So there are some that just say, this is an environment where I can't be hard on them. Just be hard on the standard is what I tell people. Don't worry about being hard on soldiers. The standard makes it hard. Number two, one thing that is different is the amount of information that leaders have by way of information technology and smartphones and all of that. And, if you ask anyone in my era, who's better, Willie Mays or Mickey Mantle, you'd see us thinking, if you ask my sons or son-in-law or a troop, they'll go to their smartphone and look at their stats, and so if you bring it up to speed and say, was LeBron better than Michael Jordan? They'll go to stats rather than, think and feel. And then it's easy for them to think that that's reality. So getting leadership has to be, it's got to be Listerine close. It's got to be felt and delivered in person. A great leader named Francis Hesselbein says leadership is who you are and management is what you do. And so leaders have to know who they are, and then improve daily, take care of the little guy, build teams, never quit. Those things are what leaders need to do. and everything else is a tool that might help or hinder them.
Sir, you mentioned everything you did at IMCOM and how you literally impacted soldiers and families, their lives and their everyday work environments. Combatives, how much you impacted soldiers and everything else. Do you ever think about your legacy, or how do you characterize it? I know you also mentioned that the kids in the military who grew up to be battalion commanders and brigade commanders and things of that nature. That's part of your legacy as well. I mean, does anything stand out more than the other to you? Does anything mean more than the other to you?
Wow. Very interesting question. If someone were to say to me, you and Margie were the best military family that we ever saw, that's more important than someone saying you were the most courageous battalion commander that we ever saw, or you impacted the Army in a way that people won't realize for 5 years, 10 years. So at the beginning of it all, it's the who we were that mattered the most, and how awesome our kids and their spouses are, partners are, and they all have dogs and they all have houses also, so that's good too. So I think that's first. But a couple guys that Mike Garrett, Steve Townsend was my S3. Mike was Alpha Company Commander and a staff officer. They got at the across the board division level. Mark O'Neill, Company Commander underneath me. Eric Carilla, Company Commander underneath me. So I just had great people around me, but they also were probably touched a little bit, and then they were touched by Frank Kearney, and they were touched by others. And it's our legacy is who we served with and who we took care of and how they've grown. But we weren't the only one that touched them, I guess I would say. But yeah, my legacy would be hard and dependable. And that's probably what I would want people to think about.
Well, again, and part of the reason I asked, sir, as I mentioned, I am a beneficiary of part of the legacy that you created, and whether it's important to you or not, I can tell I train and I work with a better force now because of things like combatives and because of where we are from the lessons learned that people at the 30,000 foot view have brought forward. So from that end, it's a personal thank you, but speaking just in general terms, those of us who have the fortunate pleasure of being in the military still, that you left an impression on, big, small, or indifferent, means that there is a legacy there. So for that, again, a personal thank you, but certainly the audience understands where we are as far as the leaders in front of us and how much they shape the formation for the future. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate those thoughts.
Well, on that note, sir, it's been an incredible career. It's an incredible story. Tell us real quick about the Ferriter Group, what you guys do, and if companies or anybody wants to get in touch with you, how they go about doing it.
Yeah, so the Ferriter Group is the second part of my life right now, and the first part is being the CEO of the National Veterans Memorial and Museum right here in Columbus. And then so that's the main effort. The supporting effort is the Ferriter Group. If you need some form of we do police street tactics, so we can get them to control people with their hands instead of pulling a gun on a teenager. We do women empowerment, all kinds of seminars. Number two, consulting if someone wanted to connect to the military and they don't know how to get into the gates. So cell phone companies work with me. On November 9th, we're going to do hiring fairs at 10 Topgolf. So Topgolf has hired us to put on these hiring fairs for our vets. So if you're interested in being one of those companies, contact us at theferritergroup.com. And just so many other things that anyway that, when someone says, what do we do at the Ferriter Group? Our answer is we help. And so if you need help, contact us.
Great stuff, sir. Thank you again so much for your time and sharing your story with us. And most of all, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. I'll see you soon, no doubt.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.